Hello, everyone. My name is Spencer Walsh. Thank you so much for joining us here today. We have a good one for you, as always, with 4 monster stories getting us ready for our first day back in a minute. Hated to be away from the show while there was really so much news. Some of the stories that happened we're just not even going to be able to cover because, unfortunately, just so much has happened since. Like, for example, OJ Simpson passing away. We're going to start with that. Really interesting piece by Wesley Morris in the New York Times just about his life, his impact on what was an incredibly important and interesting time to reflect on in American history. Also, the election is heating up and abortion is becoming an issue yet again. And because the Democrats are making it an issue, how big will it factor? And we'll take a look at the rhetoric going on in both sides in what, really is probably the single most potent political issue of our time, continuing to make a very, very big dent in electoral politics. Also, a really pretty shocking story from Khalil Nasrallah in The Cradle today, talking about what the U.S. offered Yemen in order to stop bombing the Red Sea. And finally, an interesting piece about how the war in Gaza has mobilized the American left in the New York Times. Going to break that down, see where they come from, and what interesting things they may or may not have to say. All right, so we start with OJ Simpson today. Really great an important piece here by Wesley Morris, and on what was just someone who was just absolutely seminal, American figure. He writes, "When our great Americans go, we know how to mourn them. Their lives were so grand, so architectural, infrastructural, awesome, admired, adventurous, outsized, so representative of some or many of this country's great ideals that the elegies come gushing. But there's a great American subset where the adventure rocks the infrastructure and the life leaves a gash. Our seismic Americans." That was O.J. Simpson. What do you register? Almost a 9? In some other realm, the football career and the showbiz afterlife, pitching rental cars, and enlivening spoofery would have been warranted the plain old great American treatment. Let's even include his distaste for race. That just complicates the greatness, because look at what became of that distaste. There was something hopeful about the iconoclast in O.J. He dared to defy the limits placed on his black self. Many great Americans sought to shed the supposed stigma of their blackness. They marched, they protested, they organized, they led. OJ did as OJ did, and was famous for. OJ did what OJ really was famous for doing, and he juked it. He is really what Morris said with the famous comments. For some of us younger folks. May know that from the Jay-Z song, but it was obviously an incredibly controversial comment when he made it at the time. This, I'm not black, I'm OJ. This kind of just dodging of a situation that a lot of people in the black community, especially at the time, especially in the wake of the civil rights movement, in the lead up to some of the crazy stuff that happened with police violence all throughout the 80s and the 90s, such as Rodney King. It's just this disavowal of the blackness proved to be an incredibly, divisive thing for black Americans for a long time. He was this kind of darling of the, America, just being this, as Morris said, the commercial salesman. You got the former football player, the showbiz kind of Kardashian associate. He was associated with Robert Kardashian before the Kardashians really were a big thing. But somebody who was pretty iconic in the showbiz world. There was something hopeful about him just defying those limits. His race was incompatible with his American dreams, with his OJ-ness. Why couldn't he have what white people had? Why couldn't he live as they did? And did, really, I would argue, with the beating the case in that kind of way, some would argue that he maybe even did. Are we still in great American territory? I think so. Talking about OJ here, Wesley Morris says, after all, folks knew what he meant. It can be a real burden, standing in for. Folks knew that OJ liked to run. That was him in 1977, galloping in Africa alongside LeVar Burton on night one of Roots. The man was not an intellectual, not in any conventional sense. He did exist as an idea, though, a curious, compelling, perhaps glorious what if. What if a black man were free to live as himself and never faced a consequence for merely being? What if white people just saw him as he wished they would, as OJ? And I really think, to a certain point, of course, until the murder, he was seen as that person in a place some call La La Land, no less. But it was more like a program the Laws once produced, Fantasy Island. He found himself in the nexus of a murder case in 1994, accused of stabbing to death his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend Ronald Goldman, beckoning the Richter scale. He was the defendant, yet almost immediately it was evident that the American history was on trial. And honestly, I think my biggest takeaway as somebody who obviously was not around for that period of American history, was really an incredible period of American history. I was described by my mom, my dad, all the people. Just remembering all the white people sit watching it at their computers nervously, and then just hearing the screams of all the black employees in the same office, and when he eventually got off on the day of the verdict. It really was a moment, and the American historical psyche here, as Wesley Morris put it, was on trial, and that I think is such a great way of understanding it, because that is what. And my big piece of advice to my fellow younger people out there is go watch The People versus OJ Simpson on FX. It was absolutely incredible, and it just it really does break down and show you the racial aspects of it, the fact that the idiocy of the prosecutors who were trying to get him, and then Johnny Cochran, who alongside people like Alan Dershowitz, but they don't really highlight the role that he played so much in that. But Johnny Cochran coming in there, really recognizing that this was going to be a racial thing, especially in LA, especially in the wake of the Rodney King riots, and especially when the cop that they decided to put on the stand was somebody who had just absolutely crazy racial past, and essentially had Nazi memorabilia. He was literally that bad, and to that point, all the the glove shenanigans, you can go on and on. Those are just absolutely fundamental parts of American culture. You can see even anyone even my age would be able to tell you at least some of the vague details of that trial, just because it is so an American cultural icon. Even more than OJ's football career, entertainment career ever really was, and the understanding it as kind of this this kind of racial thing, really Cochran going through, and they show it in the show, and that's probably my best reference point, because obviously, again, as I said, I was not alive during that time, but if you're in any way unfamiliar, or you just want to relive a blast from the past, go watch that FX show. It is absolutely incredible. It's absolutely essential. And whether it be the white Bronco chase, whether it be I think one of the the scene that sticks out to me the most is the jury selection, and the kind of the realization that when really that selection was made, that this is what the case was going to be about, no matter what, and then the defense the prosecutor slowly realizing that those are the terms they had to play on, and it's just really a reflective moment in American history. I mean, I would say, bounds of probability is that OJ definitely did it, but it definitely was a moment that, a lot of people would have said that it was kind of a, payback or in some sort of way, or a payback, I think, probably too crude of a term for it, but, a way of just expressing that it was actually true that at least one black person could go through the horrors of the legal system and come out the other side, essentially winning and getting one over on the legal system after so many black people in the past had been so brutally mistreated. So very interesting guy, very interesting history. And my biggest takeaway, again, is go watch that FX documentary series. It's like American Crime Story or something like that. They did one after about the murder of Versace, which I didn't even watch because I was all OJ for that show. All right. very interesting story, and we go from one interesting story to another. As the Democrats have continued to hammer home a certain single and important message. I don't know if you saw the ad the other day that essentially, it's not really beneficial to play on a podcast because it really revolves around text, that essentially shows you like a mother going through her, baby stuff and saying, this was the baby that we wanted to have, but we couldn't have, and we had to get in. We eventually it got to a point where the mother went into sepsis before she could get an abortion in Texas. Really just horrific stuff. But, it is becoming a major issue. And honestly, I don't think it's probably been a growing issue, a metastasizing issue in terms of just spreading more and more and convincing more and more people to be more pro-choice ever since Dobbs really took place. And the New York Times has a report on this from Lisa Lair, Reed Epstein, and Nicholas Nahamas. In a meeting with her staff last week, President Kamala Harris offered a prediction. Former President Donald Trump would not support a national abortion ban. Instead, she said he would take a position that would muddy the waters on the issue that she believed could be deeply damaging for his campaign. We need to make them own this, she told her aides. Well, someone has some political acumen, because that is exactly what happened. Trump essentially came out and said what was, I would say, probably the best message they can make out of a really, really smart, situation. And it just really shows you the incredible just greediness and ungratefulness of the pro-life community. Because essentially what happened over the last, week or so was that Trump was like, okay, I'm going to get my position out on abortion. And he makes this big announcement and essentially says, what I think is really the only smart position, again, for Republicans on this, which is, I worked really, really hard. I did a great thing. I appointed the justices that overturned Roe v. Wade. Now, we've always been saying, bring it back to the states, bring it back to the states. And we are going to, we've officially brought it back to the states. That's what you guys all wanted. That's what you guys all said for many, many years. That's been the pro-life line. And now, that you have done that, it's time to stop there, and we need to, again, restore power to the states. It is a states issue. We're sticking with that, and we got to, the people have their say. And, Trump is saying that because I think he's smart, and at least on the political sense, and he knows how big of an issue it's going to be because he is the least of the true believers on this issue. You got people all the way up and down the Democratic Party, the Republican Party, from someone who's relatively considered on the moderate side, from someone like Lindsey Graham, who is came out in anti this because he essentially is kind of an abortion freak on this. Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, incredible hardliner. He wasn't too happy about this. There is some people in the pro-life movement who essentially said, we only said we wanted to bring it back to the state. Literally saying this, we only said we wanted to bring it back to the states because we thought the states would agree with us. Now the states are clearly not agreeing with us. Even Kentucky voting to protect abortion rights. And then now we kind of want to change our mind here because it's a really incredibly tough thing to do when you don't have literally any type of support when it comes to any sort of Democratic constituency of support, small d Democratic constituency, up and down. Days later, after we see this kind of Trump coming out, we also see some backlash within the conservative movement, I guess you could say. And he continues to get hit in, the polls about this as he gets, from one side, people saying, oh, he's not going far enough. He's not pursuing a national abortion ban. But and by the way, those are the people, these evangelical Christian, freaks really on the abortion issue, just completely outside the norm in every single poll in every single way. They are now wavering on Trump on one side. And now on the other side, you have a whole mass of people who are these kind of, independents who are going based on the vibes of the moment, who see the Republican Party and see the ads that specifically that we're getting to a moment that the Democrats are putting out about the Republican Party that are incredibly tough when it comes to, the Democratic response on abortion. And they're saying, when the Democratic response to the Republican actions on abortion, and saying, this is ridiculous. We would never support Donald Trump, who, again, as these ads will show, did Roe v. Wade, did the overturning of Roe v. Wade. He killed the abortion rights situation. So he is pleasing. He is absolutely failing to really please the Republicans, and also most of the country is getting incredibly creeped out by the Democratic side, the Republican position on abortion here. So, and this all comes as Tuesday's in Arizona's top court upheld an 1864 abortion law. This is from before Arizona was a state, and it was written by this absolutely, insane, evil, essentially pedophile who married 5 different 14-year-old girls who all, just either passed away or, some really, really awful stuff happened to them. I do recommend that you go look that up. The history of the author of that law, that is now going to be, in 2024, going to be banning nearly all abortions. And on Friday, before more than 100 abortion rights activists and supporters, Harris plans to deliver a simple message: blame Donald Trump. From campaigns for state legislature to the race for the White House, Democrats have unified around a central message of protecting what remains of abortion access in the United States, along with the availability of long-established reproductive health measures like contraception and fertility treatments. And again, that is the big problem. And I think it's so so obvious that Democrats have such an upper hand on this issue. But one thing I still have not really heard from them in this entire time is how are they going to go about doing that? What is going to be their game plan to begin to roll the ball back in a positive direction when it comes to abortion rights? When is Roe v. Wade going to be codified, or is there going to be programs of support for at the national level for people who want an abortion? Is it going to be decriminalized? For example, stopping traveling across state lines like it has been in Texas. People have already been prosecuted for traveling and assisting those traveling across state lines to get abortions. That could be one thing. Just any sort of glimpse of an idea of a strategy to stop people from really getting the business end of the Republicans' abortions designs would be incredibly effective. But that's, of course, on a legal, actually policy level. But on a political level, this is an incredibly effective way of doing it because, a lot of times Trump will essentially say, yeah, blame me. I did that. His message essentially is, I'm the one who overturned Roe v. Wade. I'm the one who gave everybody what they wanted on the pro-life side. And I think that's a very generous way of putting it, as we know. But I am the one who gave everyone what they wanted on that. So why don't people just stop asking for more and be satisfied with what you guys already have? And that's essentially his message to his Republican base, who is braying for a national abortion ban right now. But the rest of the country hears that and they're like, that is absolutely crazy. That is absolutely crazy. So that is the situation, I think, that politically Republicans are taking Democrats are taking very, very savvy advantage of, because it will be an absolutely critical issue for this election, because just the same way it was in 2022. But I think really the thing I have yet to see is, and we were yet to see this throughout the Obama administration, throughout any time in the wake of 1973, to actually, codify abortion into law, secure it from, crazy people like Samuel Alito who can come in and, turn it over. I've yet to see any sort of strategy in the current moment from Democrats to do that, which is something that I think not just me, but a lot of people who support any sort of abortion rights would very much like to see. So with that being said, we will move on to our next story. A really interesting one in The Cradle, which is a pretty solid magazine reporting on the Middle East from within the region. And this is a really kind of incredible and interesting story from a pretty well-connected reporter in the region. In a special briefing on the 3rd of April, nearly 3 months after Yemen launched its far-reaching naval operations to debilitate Israel's ability to conduct war on Gaza, U.S. Special Envoy for Yemen, Timothy Lenderking, touted the importance of seeking diplomatic solutions in Yemen. That's definitely something that we've seen reported in other places as well, instead of the military ones his government has been loudly advocating for months. And again, this is something that, part 1112 that I'm very proud to say, News Flash told you. You could have been listening to this right when this Houthi designs were starting, and the strike backs on the Houthi strikes in the city, in the Red Sea, and I said at the time, and it wasn't really, I'm not trying to give myself too much credit. It doesn't take really a genius to figure this stuff out, is that this striking is not going to work because, and this was the part that was really so unfathomable to so many people in the mainstream media, is that, oh yeah, well, the Houthis are authentic supporters of Gaza, and as long as the Gaza situation continues, and they've said this before, they stopped when there was a ceasefire. They have started right back again when the bombing started on Gaza again. Because of that, no bombs are going to make them stop. They have enough capabilities. They have enough, Iranian funding, internal funding, wherever they get their funding from, whatever. They have the resources to keep going, and survive some limited United States, very well, pre-planned United States strikes. The only way they could really pose a threat is an invasion, which they're, never going to do, just fully invade Yemen, with U.S. boots on the ground. So they're you can't do a full invasion. You can't stop them with limited strikes. The only way you can do it is a diplomatic solution to open up the ports. And it has had a really big impact on shipping. With we've seen all the graphics, all the videos of ships going the other way, and there's been billions of dollars of cost to shipping over the 5 months since this has been going on. And once you get to that method, it's not just the Houthis trying to assert themselves in their own country versus the Saudi-backed groups. This has clearly been, something that has been done for Gaza. And as long as Gaza is going on, they're not planning on stopping anytime soon. And, I don't think that should be a surprise to anyone. And Lender King and the United States finding that out a little bit later than they could have if they had listened to Newsflash. So maybe, that's what they should have done. I don't know. But, so Lender King's stance contrasted sharply with Washington's announcement in December of a multinational coalition against Yemen's Ansar Allah-led forces aimed at safeguarding international shipping, and Ansar Allah, though, is the Houthis, for those of you who don't know, and effectively protecting Israeli-linked trade from Yemen's sweeping naval blockade. But as tensions heightened and regional allies have hesitated to join the U.S.-UK coalition in fear of direct Yemeni retaliatory strikes, the U.S. and its allies have quietly sought to entice Sana'a into negotiations through offers conveyed by Omani and other international mediators who maintain ties with Yemen's de facto government in Sana'a. Lender King's position may be, in fact, reflecting an astounding set of private U.S. promises made via intermediaries to Ansar Allah behind closed doors, pledges that essentially tick every box on the resistance movement's wish list. Informed Yemeni sources reveal to the Cradle that the U.S. offered Sana'a in exchange for neutrality in the ongoing Gaza war, an acknowledgment of its legitimacy. This would involve severely reduce, and this is, by the way, a group that the United States has just designated a terrorist group that they're negotiating for. A huge, as ridiculous as that designation is, it's a huge climb down of what, the U.S.'s upfront position would be. Oh, we never negotiate with terrorists. We're going to wipe these people off the map. They're about to find out, well, we don't have healthcare. Rah! Getting all hyped up. And then this is what it comes to, if you are politically, they could have probably caused a dent with a full-blown invasion into Yemen with U.S. boots on the ground. But again, that would have been absolutely inconceivable, and they're not going to stop anytime soon with just this, once on, on and off bombing, hitting some targeted sites. Like, that is not going to be enough. Like, these people are committed to defending the people of Gaza in the best way that they can. And this, and they have had an impact, and the impact that the United States has been unable to stop, and still has been unable to stop, despite giving them major concessions. So this would involve severely reducing the role of Saudi-backed Presidential Council, led by Rashid al-Alimi, which is essentially the oppositional force that's been kind of forced out to the deserts of Yemen in the Yemeni civil war over the last 7 or 8 years. So this would reduce their role and accelerate the signing of a roadmap with Riyadh and Abu Dhabi to end the aggression against Yemen. The sources further reveal that the Americans pledged to immediately release withheld Yemeni public sector salaries from the National Saudi Bank, lift the country's siege, entirely reopen Sana'a Airport, ease restrictions on the port of Hodeidah and facilitate a comprehensive prisoner exchange agreement with all involved parties. So essentially, actually, coming to negotiations and realizing that the Yemeni civil war should be negotiated. It's essentially over at this point, and a negotiated settlement and the hostilities should come to an end. Coming to a position that a year or so ago, the Yemenis would only dream of the United States coming to this position. In terms of the reconstruction, the sources say Washington pledged to repair the damages, remove foreign forces from all occupied Yemeni lands and islands, and remove Ansarallah from the State Department's terrorism list as soon as they stop their attacks in support of Gaza. Despite the tempting offers, which would remain the subject of negotiations between Sana'a and Riyadh over 2 years, the Yemenis have remained steadfast. Ansarallah leader Abdel Malik al-Houthis' consistent position, as reiterated in his speeches, has been to continue operations as long as Israeli aggression against Gaza persists. From the outset, marked by Israel's declaration of a state of war following the 7th of October Al-Aqsa flood operation, Sana'a threw its weight behind the Palestinian resistance, launching comprehensive drone and ballistic missile attacks against southern Israel and the occupied port city of al-Rush, known as Eilat Port. In response to the Yemeni salvos and the interception attempts by U.S. warships, Washington initiated a campaign of threats against Sana'a, which in turn demanded Sana'a, by the way, Yemeni capital, which in turn demanded an immediate cessation of aggression against Gaza as a precondition for halting its military operations. Their exact words to the Americans were, quote, "We are not within the circle of those you dictate to." Matters only intensified as Ansarallah began deploying previously unused naval strategies, not even utilized against Yemen's aggressors Saudi Arabia and the UAE in 9 years of battle, with the al-Houthi vowing to obstruct Israeli ships in the Red Sea. The strategy was actualized days later on 19th of November when the Yemeni naval commandos stormed an Israeli-linked vessel, the Galaxy Leader, and its crew, redirecting the ship to Yemeni shores. This daring naval action prompted the U.S. to pursue dual strategies. First, involving intimidation publicly in preparation of a naval coalition to support Israel, and the second, encouraging diplomatic engagements through Arab and international mediators to halt Sana'a's impactful naval operations. Sana'a's leadership not only dismissed these overtures, but expanded the naval blockade to include non-Israeli vessels en route to Israeli ports and extended their theater of operations as far as the Indian Ocean to cut off Israel's alternative long-route shipments. Yemen's firm refusal to succumb to either enticement or intimidation led the U.S. and the U.K. to initiate aggressive military operations against the war-torn Persian Gulf state 3 months ago, aiming to neutralize the Yemeni threat and halt maritime attacks in support of Gaza under the guise of protecting maritime navigational freedom. Operation Prosperity Guardian, I believe it was called. As a countermeasure, Sana'a escalated its military response by expanding operations to target not only U.S. and British ships, but also introducing advanced weaponry into its arsenal, including sinking of the cargo ship Ruby Mar, attacking other vessels, and broadening the theater of operations to the Arabian Sea and the Indian Ocean, a strategic move to ramp up pressure on those executing the brutal war on Gaza. Which is it really is incredible to see, like the fact that if you look at where Yemen was coming from, if you look at the really success that they've had against U.S. interests and U.S.-backed forces, is essentially what they were dealing with this time as well. It didn't make a lot of sense for them to essentially lay down so easy and say, okay, I'm sorry, we'll stop, as so many people have done to the United States in the past, because they essentially fought off these U.S. interests in the form of Saudi Arabian aggression and things like that for the last 7-8 years in the form of the Yemeni civil war. But now that has been kind of over and done with, it's been dealt with, they really felt, and I think rightly so, that they would be able to really resist this effectively. And I think the fact that they have done, undeniably represents a pretty solid demonstration of declining U.S. military power and ability to exact its will over every single country in the world, unquestionably. Because I think the Houthis is a very, very clear one here and are continuing to have the upper hand as long as they do not fold to U.S. interests and continue to exercise. It's only been 34 operations as opposed to, I think, 500 raids since they're on the U.S.-UK side And you see they're expending tons of military resources to do this. I think it's like $60,000 a drone that they're sending versus way less high-tech drones been going over on the Houthi side. And you can see which one is having more impact. All in all, just a really remarkable climb down in a very, very rare scenario where we see the U.S. say, okay, I give you up. I give you everything. I give up. You can have what you want. We'll give you your legitimacy. We'll give you your resistance. We'll stop trying to overthrow your government, whatever. And then that in itself is remarkable. But even more remarkable is the opposing power saying, no, we're going to keep doing exactly what we're doing. So really, really interesting situation in Yemen, and a very, very important one to continue following, as we will do here on Newsflash. All right, to our last story, which is an American one in the New York Times. Katie Kluick, Katie Benner, and Shira Frankel writing, support for Palestinians, a cause once largely championed on college campuses and in communities with ties to the region, has transformed into a defining issue of the Democratic left, galvanizing a broad swath of groups into the most significant protest movement of the Biden era. Through daily organizing sessions on Zoom and grassroots campaigning in battleground states, a sprawling new iteration of the pro-Palestinian movement is now propelled by both longtime and sometimes hardline activists and mainstream pillars of Democratic coalitions. Organizations that are usually focused on climate, housing, or immigration are regularly protesting the Israeli military's campaign in Gaza, which followed the Hamas-led October 7th attacks and has killed more than 33,000 people, according to local officials. And again, it's like, I think the coding that you're supposed to get while you're reading this is like, well, they're focusing on climate, housing, and immigration, and Gaza? That just can't be. And it's just like, really kind of fundamentally, I think, misunderstands the nature of just like left activism. Like, these people care about all this stuff equally. Like, you're not like signed into a contract to only advocate for housing for 3 years or whatever. Then you can advocate for Gaza if you want. These people are aware, they know what's happening around them, and they definitely feel the impact of it. Labor activists are calling for a ceasefire. Black clergy leaders have appealed directly to the White House. Young Americans are using online tools to mobilize voters and send millions of missives to Congress. And an emerging coalition of advocacy groups is discussing how to press its case at the DNC this summer. For example, the uncommitted vote, there's gotten several delegates, actually way more than a lot of people thought going in, to send to the Democratic Convention in some way in Chicago to really protest this and to say that, Joe Biden, you are in some serious trouble if you don't listen to us, listen to Michigan, listen to Wisconsin, listen to, Hawaii, all these parts of the Democratic base that represent, young people, black people, just non-white people in general, really, and most principally, of course, Muslim Americans, which are scattered throughout several key, swing states. We have a message. We have moral, we have morality on our side. We have international law on our side. So listen to us, or we're going to make your political life a lot harder. I think it has been a message that has sunk through more and more and more. Interviews with 36 activists and others involved in the ceasefire cause, as well as their critics, reveal an effort that is at once increasingly powerful and disjointed and difficult to clearly define. There's no single leader or organization at the helm, nor even a single name for the effort. It comprises hundreds of groups from the national to the hyperlocal level, all loosely united behind a call for Israel to end its military campaign. But there are far from consensus on other core issues, such as how to achieve a ceasefire and what should come afterwards. There has been very calibrated statements from labor and faith leaders. More strident groups and other activists often stage demonstrations that snarl traffic or drown out politicians at events. We're seeing, just like these, which is really, again, starting to get to these respectable liberals, like in, New York Magazine, New York Times, The Atlantic, saying, this is disgusting, illiberal protest to drown out all these leaders. It's like, that's the only way. Literally the only way, not even that you could get the politicians to listen, that you could get the politicians to even hear the pro-Palestinian message that they have been so stridently and ardently ignoring since October the 7th, since, whether it be people like, Biden, Harris, any sort of major, Democratic leader, even Jill Biden was getting heckled for quite a bit. On campuses, especially, some protests have turned ugly or violent. Jewish students and leaders have been described being harassed and threatened by people angered by the war in Gaza. And I looked at I was curious, like, but wait, what was the violent protest? Someone smashed a window at Berkeley. That was the extent of the violent protest there. But again, been quite overwhelmingly peaceful, bringing, families together, people young and old into the streets and stuff like that, really throughout. And also that, in some protests, they have been attacked by, pro-Israel people, including the Columbia, skunk gas incident, which received no media attention, let alone any action in a substantive way from Colombia. And meanwhile, we have also had seen an increase in anti-Muslim and anti-Arab acts, including the killing of a Muslim-American 6-year-old boy, in a Palestinian-American 6-year-old boy in Chicago, and the shooting of 3 students of Palestinian descent in Vermont. In the aftermath of the October 7th attack, which officials in Israel say killed about 1,200 people in Israel, but we've seen recent messages or research say that the actual number of civilians killed were around 700. The demonstrations against Israel would often be led by groups like Students for Justice in Palestine, which will later be banned or suspended from several universities. Left-wing Jewish organizations, including the Jewish Voice for Peace chapters, and groups heavily involved in street protests that cheered or justified the attack as legitimate resistance, such as the Palestinian Youth Movement or Within Our Lifetime. Again, because this is where you see the New York Times, putting its kind of figure on the scale, and it's still continuing to not acknowledge some of the really fundamental mistakes it's made, for example, in its Screams of That Word story, that have shaped the conflict as well. But again, I guess it's not really about that, this article, but I think it certainly plays a role. Also, defining what exactly the group said, I think is very, very important, as in what they, say, I love to see the death of Israeli civilians, or just, what exactly they said to quote-unquote justify or cheer the October 7th attack. But as Israel's military, so again, essentially what they mean to say here is, first it was the crazies, now it's everybody. That's what they're saying about Jewish Voice for Peace or Palestinian Youth Movement or Within Our Lifetime. But as Israel's military response intensified and the humanitarian crisis in Gaza spiraled, a much broader constellation of more traditional democratic-leaning organizations, leaders, and voters began to engage. Activists are now wrestling with how to push President Biden and his Democratic allies, or whether to break from them in an election year. Biden is under intense pressure to take a tougher stand against Israel, alongside an ally from powerful parts of the divided party. In a Pew Research poll last month, a slim majority of the Democrats said the way Israel was conducting its war was unacceptable, even as the same share said its reasons for fighting were either completely or somewhat valid. After 7 aid workers were killed by Israeli strikes last week in the World Central Kitchen situation, Biden threatened to condition future support for Israel on how it addresses civilian casualties and other humanitarian crises in Gaza. Other Democrats are going much further in their condemnations. There is now a real link between prominent elected officials and on-the-ground organizing, said Abbas Alawiya, who is a 32-year-old Democratic strategist helping to lead a national effort protesting Biden's Israel policy. That link is leading to what I've experienced as one of the largest anti-war organizing efforts this generation has ever seen. For decades, pro-Palestinian activists largely existed on the political fringe, drowned out by bipartisan support for Israel and by the well-organized, well-funded pro-Israel organizations. But after years of fraying ties between the Democratic Party and Benjamin Netanyahu, the Israeli leader, the outbreak of war abruptly exposed just how much the political landscape has shifted. After October 7th, Biden traveled to Israel, but in universities, there was already a powerful backlash against Israel brewing within hours of the attack, transforming student groups with sleepy social media presences into powerful campus voices. On October 5th, Columbia University's students, and they're literally going through the Columbia SJP Instagram, that drew 369 likes and 14 comments. On October 9th, obviously a few days after the attack, a post proclaiming full solidarity with the Palestinian resistance received nearly 33,000 likes compared to 369, the previous day. That is, again, the group that was attacked by fellow students, I believe. And, we don't know for sure because nothing was ever done by the university about it. And it seemed, of course, no, really intention. And this is why I think this story is interesting because, this response about, full solidarity with the Palestinian resistance from, Colombia SJP, that at the time really drew some pretty, mainstream criticism. There was like people in the establishment forces, people, the American left is dead, respectable Democrats, Warren type Democrats, I guess, is like the liberals who like to see themselves a little bit edgy, but not quite as crazy as those crazy progressive lefties where like, DSA is done, leftists are done. But, as Israel bombarded Gaza and launched a genocidal campaign on Gaza, scenes of death and devastation in Israel were increasingly supplanted on television and social media by images of death and devastation in Gaza. Despite the best efforts of people like the New York Times, who, for the first month exclusively reported on every single, Gaza or Israeli hostage and their family, down to, what they had for breakfast that morning, and about justifiably about how bad their suffering was. And, it was just unimaginable suffering. If my son or my father or brother was in Gaza potentially being, tortured or whatever, that it was an unimaginable situation. But I feel like this was all going on when, the civil infrastructure, the civilian housing, and just the people of Gaza were being mowed down by the thousands every single day. And that really, I think, was what created this disconnect, this mainstream versus, social media disconnect. It started to slowly trickle out, and now is burgeoning up to the point where people like the New York Times, who were really instrumental in creating that disconnect between the mainstream, pressure to conform and be supportive of Israel versus the actual reality, that really has had a major impact, and now it's up to a point where even they, in the New York Times, just can't ignore it anymore. We are seeing profound pain, said William Barber, an activist and professor at Yale Divinity School. Really, great guy, big fan of William Barber, who was also, I believe, a reverend. So put some respect on his name, New York Times, who has spoken with Vice President Kamala Harris about a ceasefire. He says, nothing organizes people like that pain. On November 8th, the Coalition of Black Clergy members ran an advertisement in the New York Times calling for a bilateral ceasefire. The ad, signed by more than 900 Christian faith leaders, was perhaps the clearest sign yet of the movement's growth. It reflected long-standing relationships between Black and Palestinian activists dating to the demonstrations against police violence in Ferguson, Missouri in 2014, back to the point where, Palestinians would teach Ferguson activists how to, the best ways to resist tear gas and police violence and things like that. And also, it's a big reason why a lot of police departments have been going, on the other side of that coin, to Israel in the past. The Reverend Michael McBride, founder of Black Church PAC, who organized the letter, recalled the online engagement he received from Palestinian young people while in Ferguson. 9 years later, he was shaken by the scenes from Gaza on social media. I don't think any of us had seen anything like that before. Other core Democratic constituencies were mobilizing too in the labor movement, progressive and younger members, as well as workers from heavily Arab and Arab American Dearborn, Michigan, agitated for their unions to take a stand. Brandon Mansilla, a director with the United Auto Workers, said that by early November, as the death toll rose in Gaza, union members were regularly joining demonstrations in their UAW gear. It wasn't just about protesting the bombings, said Mansilla, who helped lead the ceasefire call efforts. It was also trying to say, I belong to this organization, and I want that organization to reflect my principles. In December, the UAW International became the largest labor union at the time to back an immediate ceasefire. While others have urged an immediate permanent ceasefire, others have, some activists have urged for that. Others have pressed for a more negotiated bilateral ceasefire with pressure on Israel and Hamas, illustrating both growing disillusionment with Israel's war efforts and stark differences about how to end it. But either way, this is I think it's really telling here, and this is the kind of the final confirmation that we need that certain tweets, certain pundit prognostications about the death of the American left, comparing it to various socialist parties in Russian states that were shattered, or former Soviet Union states that were shattered by Soviet actions and just the embarrassment that caused. It would be an absolutely uncommitted catastrophe and failure. This has been an unprecedented mobilization, an unprecedented unification of various American left-wing groups to put pressure on the Democratic Party in a way that really has never been seen in my lifetime, in my time following politics, to really take a bigger and broader step on this. Again, up to a point where, if the New York Times is writing a story about this, I'd say, a bridge has certainly been crossed. All right, that's all we got for you guys today. Bit of a long show, first day back. Hope you enjoyed it. We'll be back very soon. Probably, if not, we will be back on Monday, if not before.